Shabbat Shalom and Good Shabbos. This is going to be the third weekend that our synagogues are going to stand empty. We're going to be together with our families. And this Shabbat is a very special Shabbat. It's called Shabbat HaGadol, Shabbos HaGadol, the weekend before Passover, where commonly rabbis would give, the great Pesach, they'd give great long speeches. So I want to share with you a thought today, and I want to share with you a story. And I think both have something of importance to tell us. When you look at the Haggadah, all of us know the Haggadah, you'll know something very interesting. Not once is mentioned the name of Moses. In fact, what is the primary people that are recalled in the Haggadah? The great Talmudic sages that lived in the period of time after the destruction of the temple. And it was a tragic moment in Jewish history. The Romans' rule was very oppressive. They were suffering tremendously. They were living with this sense of loss that the temple had been destroyed. And one would have wondered, what kind of hope did they have for the future? And what does the Haggadah tell us? That the primary mitzvah was to tell the story of the Jewish people, the story of the Exodus. And what were the rabbis of the Talmud, like Rabbi Akiva and the others, really doing? They were saying, you know what? We've come from a very difficult place, and we are in a very harsh time in Jewish history. Nevertheless, we're going to tell our story. We're going to talk about the Exodus, because it's going to give us a sense of the future will be much, much better. And so, too, when we're sitting around our Seder tables, and we're all wondering about this unusual time that we're living with, we have to tell our story. We have to remember the glory of the past, because that is a symbol of the hope from the future. And I want to tell you a story about a tragic and sad story, but a story with a powerful message about hope. There is a funeral parlor in the Borough Park section of Brooklyn that last Sunday had 30 funerals. 30 different people passed away. Now, people could not attend the funerals. In fact, they took the bodies to the grave and interred them privately. But they allowed each family to come in for a few moments, standing separately, and say a prayer, a Kapitel Tillim, a chapter of Psalms. They couldn't say Kaddish because they didn't have a minyan, with their loved one at the casket of their loved one. And the families pulled up to the funeral parlor in Brooklyn. They sat in their cars, and they were called in to come in for a few moments to stand next to the casket of their loved one. And there was a family that's exactly what they did. And they came into the funeral parlor, and they cried, and they said a few prayers, and they felt this tremendous sense of loss, and the loss about how they were mourning their father and their grandfather who had passed away. And they went back to their car. And as they drove away from the funeral parlor, they got a phone call. We have made a big mistake. The casket we brought into you was not the casket of your father and your grandfather. It wasn't the leader of your family. It was sadly somebody else. We'll bring out the casket of your father. So they came a second time to the funeral parlor, and they went through the same thing. And this now with a greater sense of emotion, because they thought they had done it already, and they hadn't, and it wasn't their father, and it wasn't their grandfather. But as they left, they turned one to another, because they were told by the funeral parlor something very remarkable. That first casket was brought in was an old man who was found in his home. He had died 4 days earlier. He had no family. He had no friends. He had nobody to mourn for them. And the family said one to another, wow, what an amazing event. Our father, our grandfather, who we are mourning his loss today, was a person who always put the needs of others before the needs of himself. He was a person who was what's called in Hebrew a Baal Chesed, a man of kindness, a man of compassion, a man of charitable giving, a man who cared for other people. And here in his moment of death, what did he cause? That we would mourn and say prayers for a person who had nobody else to mourn for him. That he was putting first in a spiritual way the needs of another person before that of his own. My friends, we're going through a very difficult time, but it pauses us and causes us to think about our lives, about how do we live our lives. And this story teaches us something very important. The great sages of ancient times, they didn't put forth their needs first. They remembered the glorious story of the Jewish people, And they wanted us to retell it, and they wanted the whole Jewish people to remember where they came from because they would know what their destiny is and where they are going. The family in Borough Park, that man who passed away, caused in a remarkable thing, that the person who had nobody to mourn for him would be, somebody would mourn for him also. While we are sitting closed, we need to think about our lives and what's really important. It's not just about ourselves, it's about the story of our glorious past, and it's about how do we live our lives here together in this world. Do we live our lives which is about a narcissistic life, or do we live a life of caring and giving to others? So this Shabbos, it's called Shabbos HaGadol. It's a great Shabbos. Let's pause and think about these things. And let's find the sense of hope for the future. And let's seize the moments that we have now and live them not just for ourselves, but for others. Shabbat Shalom.